Subscribe to our YouTube channel and don't forget to press the bell icon to get all the latest updates. Hello and a very warm welcome to the Mojo Story, our independent digital platform. My name is Barkha Dutt and I'm here to talk about same-sex marriage. In 2018, India's courts decriminalized homosexuality, one of the most prejudicial, archaic, anachronistic laws that existed till it was challenged in court. Now that legal fight has gone one step further. The Delhi High Court, in response to a petition, has issued notices to the centre asking the centre to clarify its position on same-sex marriage. Petitioners are saying that since the law has now stipulated that there can be no discrimination on the basis of sexuality, to stop people from getting, same-sex couples that is, from getting married is a form of discrimination. To talk about where this fight will go, why LGBTQ community is actually seeking some of the institutions that heterosexuals have begun to question, in fact. Let's introduce on our program today, our panel. And we've got first-person stories. We've also got the lawyer who's representing some of the petitioners in this case. And we've also got a queer theorist with us. Let me introduce everybody one by one. Raghav and Nicola are with us. They're here from London, and they are, of course, partners. So welcome to the program. Raghav Awasti is the lawyer in this case for one of the petitioners who wants same-sex marriage rights under the Hindu Marriage Act and says that the act doesn't actually stipulate that it's only a man and a woman who are positioning themselves to get married. It only talks about two Hindus getting married, and other petitioners are asking for the same rights under the Special Marriage Act. And we're also joined by Rahul. Rahul Sen is a queer theorist and a PhD candidate. So an interesting mix of voices. Let me start with you, Raghav, if I can, because you're the one who's going to be one of those who's putting forth the legal fight. What is the basis of the fight, and why have you focused on the Hindu Marriage Act in particular?
So as far as the legal basis of the fight is concerned, it is quite clear. The Hindu Marriage Act doesn't say that marriage can take place only between a Hindu man and a Hindu woman. It says any two Hindus can get married under the Act. And you have a 2018 judgment, which was not there earlier, which makes it amply clear that consensual homosexual relations in India are not criminalized. And they've, of course, not struck the section down, but they've just read down whatever the section said. And in light of this, and in light of all the observations that were made in the 2018 judgment, any other interpretation which does not allow homosexual couples or like LGBTQIA couples to marry would be unconstitutional, because what we are taught, it's Constitutional Law 101, is that when there are two interpretations available as far as the section is concerned, then you take the interpretation which would render the statutory provision in consonance with the Constitution. So that's the legal basis. As far as the question of why we have only challenged the Hindu Marriage Act is concerned, these were my instructions, and the petitioner somehow seems to feel that as two Hindus, that two Hindus should be allowed to marry under the Hindu Marriage Act also. And there are some arguments that we intend to make later when the matter comes up for final hearing, to the effect that there are so many instances in our ancient Hindu scriptures wherein which would constitute clear evidence of the fact that in ancient India, heterosexual marriage was not really the norm. Only people apart from heterosexual and cisgender people were getting married.
Okay, so it's quite interesting because, of course, in your case, Raghav, your client has sought relief under the Hindu Marriage Act, but there are other petitioners who are seeking similar relief under the Special Marriage Act as well, and the court is now asking the centre to clarify its position. My question to Raghav and Nicola is somewhat different. Heterosexuals are beginning to question the relevance of marriage as an institution. Feminists like myself see it as a deeply patriarchal institution, as a deeply conformist, socially conservative, fuddy-duddy institution, an institution that was first created actually actually for enabling people to share property. Aren't you turning the wheel back? Isn't the community turning the wheel back by seeking institutions that heterosexuals have begun to question? Let me start with you, Raga, and then Nicola. Sorry, I'm just going to unmute you and then go ahead. Yeah.
It's a very interesting point, Barkha, and my past, that I have been married. I've been in a heterosexual relationship. So, when you meet someone, you are interested in that person and they propose to you, you get married. So what is the difference now? Is that there is a choice, right? So what we are doing right now is we're actually questioning that. We are saying that, hey, at that point, if you're in a heterosexual relationship, somebody proposes to you, you have the choice whether you want to accept that or you don't want to. But we don't have that choice. Nicola and I, if we were in India at this point, and if Nicola were to propose to me or I was to propose to her, we don't have that choice. So the starting point in itself is not there for us. So when you look at things like that, you think that at least, would I want to get married personally? If I had a choice, I would.
And why is that? Not to be a downer on your relationship, but just let me explain to viewers who don't know the two of you how interesting your life journey has been, Raga. And you've actually captured it in a book, which I encourage everybody to read. But as you mentioned, you were in a heterosexual marriage till you came out. The coming out is always tougher to come out to yourself. And now in what could be called modern love, you're on the best terms with your ex-husband. And the three of you bring up your children together. You're like three parents to children. And to me, your life actually underscores, Raga, the irrelevance of the institution of marriage, right? It is a fully irrelevant institution because there are many different ways in which the modern family defines itself. So explain to me why the LGBTQ community, I get that there should be no discrimination, but Raga, once again, why, Raga, do you want this for yourself, given your life's journey?
See, Barkha, I went through a long phase after my marriage was annulled that I didn't want to be married. And in fact, I said I would never get married again because, hey, living in a committed relationship is the same as being married without the burdens or the patriarchy of being married. And I questioned everything. But now that I'm in a relationship with Nicola, it's been 13 years for us. We have the choices, by the way, because I have a New Zealand citizenship and I have a right to remain in London, in the UK indefinitely. So in both countries, I have the right to marry, but I haven't yet married because I went through this whole confusion of saying that why should I get married? Exactly what you said. And I didn't want to until 8 weeks ago, there was a reality check. And there was a medical condition, as you know, where Nicola was, wheeled into an emergency room. And we didn't know whether she was going to make it or not. And at that time, when the hospital, she basically gave me as the next of kin. But I really had to go through a lot of frustrating moments to even be allowed access to Nicola, to be allowed the opportunity to make decisions on behalf of her. I didn't have that choice and I didn't know how to do that. Although I live in the UK, although I'm seen as a partner, and although I'm not in a civil relationship, union or a marriage, my relationship with Nicola is still very legal. And I still had to go through that. And that's when I thought, I should marry because marriage gives you a certain amount of not only social status and it's symbolic, but also gives you the legal rights.
So you're making a practical point in a way that you're saying that because the world still recognizes or puts so much premium on marriage, in moments of emergency, for example, your partner ending up in hospital, for you to say I'm her partner is not still a nomenclature that a lot of the world understands. You don't automatically, for example, if you go to the doctor and say, give me an appraisal of what's happening with Nicola, they'll say, who are you? And it's not enough for them to say I'm her partner. Nicola, do you agree? For me, the world should actually be questioning all of these institutions a lot more instead of conforming to them. But go ahead, Nicola.
But yeah, I agree. But at the end of the day, almost whatever country you live in, marriage or the legal union of two people in love is seen as a very important part of society. I lived in India for some time and there was nothing we could do in India. We couldn't get a bank account together. We decided to buy a house. No one would give us a loan. So it was it's sort of part of the structure of society. I actually grew up in New Zealand, and I saw New Zealand change. I think in the early or the mid to late 80s, we had something called the Homosexual Law Reform Bill, which was very similar to the overturning of Section 377. It's very similar. But it took until 2013 to give full rights for marriage in New Zealand. But because of the law change, and I think after that law change, I can't remember what year, I think it was 1993, the law changed in regards of anti-discrimination against sexuality. So basically New Zealand was trying to be anti-discriminatory. The laws, you could not discriminate against anybody on the basis of sexuality, religion, whatever it was. And I think over time, I've seen that the society changes. So once the law changed, the society sort of follows up, and then the next generation comes up, and then you realise what were all those people doing, discriminating against that? Like, it becomes normal. So after, like 20 years or odd years, it took New Zealand to sort of do that span. I actually saw the change in the society in New Zealand. And I think that after living in India, I think India is ready for that too. I see particularly young Indians, who are not always young, people are ready, I think, for a change. The world is ready for change, and steadily different countries, like I think it's, how many countries
29 countries.
29 countries now
legalized.
Have legal rights for marriage. And I think it's ready for democratic forward societies to do that.
So what I'm hearing both of you say, Raghav, I'll bring you in just in a second. What I'm hearing both of you say is that, one, there is discrimination, so that choice has to be for the LGBTQ community. They're free to reject marriage if they want to, just as many heterosexuals reject it, and they're free to embrace it. But what I really heard from Raghav was a practical consideration: the absence of legal identity, the absence of access to many things that would take place within a marriage. Raghav, you were wanting to add to that, and then I'll go to Rahul.
I want to add another example. So as you know, throughout the world these days, there are travel restrictions, and many countries, like in the European Union, make exceptions for unmarried partners. But in India, the situation is that only if you're a spouse of an Indian citizen can you enter on a normal tourist visa. Otherwise, you have to go through a whole bunch of procedures. But let's assume for a moment that there is an LGBT couple, and one half of which lives somewhere else, and they want to come to India. They cannot do that unless they are married. So there are many practical considerations, and I think, amongst other things, this is also really cruel as far as homosexual couples are concerned. So, like, personally, I am in a relationship which is not marriage. I even have a love child, and I don't think it's so important. But yes, as long as there are these practical legal considerations that all of us have to think of. Now, I'll cite one last example. I arrived in Germany in the middle of August, and there was so much paperwork that I had to fill out, so many photographs and so many things that I had to show to the German border control authorities, which I would not have been asked to do if I was married. So I think, as long as the legal system places a premium on marriage, and as long as marriage is there as a legal institution, there is no reason. There are very practical considerations when it comes to making sure that LGBT couples can also marry.
Rahul, as someone who's actually studied this space, if I can bring you in, there has been a lot of debate, and I know it's been a debate within the community itself over whether the values, the mores, the behavior patterns that you embrace are different in the queer community, in the LGBTQ community, from the heterosexual community. And I've seen a lot of good and interesting academic work on how one doesn't have to ape the other. And there are people who believe that marriage, and I'm sorry to be a downer on this institution, but I really am a skeptic, that it is a kind of illustration of many institutional, conservative, structural orthodoxies that it seems peculiar for the LGBTQ community that has just broken free to want to embrace. So what does your research tell you, Rahul? Sorry, let me just unmute you and then go ahead. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Barkha. And I think I'm in complete solidarity with you in your critique of the institution. And I have kind of a two-way response to this. One is that when we are talking about LGBT marriage and queer marriage, we are talking in a way about receiving a state sanction for that marriage. Because if you pick up any book like, say, Ruth Vanita's Love's Right, you will see that she has documented a lot of these queer couples who already have been married when 377 was there, and now when 377 is not there. And this is to say that, she has kind of documented a lot of these young girls who have eloped from their houses and they got married. A lot of these young queer couples who ran away from the family which was abusive and they got married. So it's not as if marriage was not kind of happening, but now when the community is pleading for marriage, it is asking for a state sanction on marriage. And herein comes my opinions, which are kind of at odds with the popular queer opinion, which is to say that I think when we are making this demand for marriage, and quite justifiably so, as Raga and Nicola have been saying, keeping in mind the practical side to it, we are also in some way entering into the circuits of normativity. We are also in some way entering into the domains which we have been critiquing so far.
Exactly what I'm saying. Yeah, I don't get it.
Yeah, and this is not just in terms of the fact that marriage as an institution is patriarchal or heterosexist, but this is to say that the notion of the couple itself is a form which is violated. And this is a struggle which is not just limited to queer people, but you think of single parents, you think of single women, you think of sex workers. They have been fighting this battle for a very, very long time. So it's not just something which I think the queer community has been negotiating, but many people across identitarian spectrum, they have been negotiating that. And my position on that is, yes, I kind of recognize the anxiety and the pangs and the trials and tribulations which Nicola and Raga have been pointing out in terms of the practical side to marriage, and certain things you cannot do if you are not really participants in that institution. But my position here would be that, I think a lot of our energy, a lot of our times, instead of asking that, okay, now that I'm not getting it, and therefore I should include myself in the institution, should be directed towards the fact that so much of bureaucracy in our country, so much of bureaucracy and paperwork in our country is so heterosexist and heteronormative. And there is no attempt, no movement, no conversation to change those.
Yeah.
And all of that circles around the fact that the couple form, be it a heterosexual couple or a homosexual couple, is still privileged over but
here's the counter argument. I mean, you already know, Rahul, from this conversation where my intellectual position lies. I find the institution of marriage extremely almost sort of autopiloted into society in a way that I think it makes choices often unthinking, and then it keeps people in institutions that they often want to leave. But let me argue it from Raghav and Nicola and Raga's side. And that argument would be that it's their choice to reject it. Right? That argument would simply be that changing the law does not impose marriage as a norm within the community. It simply provides the option. Why does that make you uncomfortable? Is it because you feel that the premium on marriage or coupledom remains? Is it because of the premium of it? And is it because you feel that the energy of the community should be best spent on other things, on what's happening in workspaces, on what's happening, in actually translating legal equality into practical equality? Rahul?
I'm in absolute solidarity with people who are demanding marriage rights. In fact, I'm not saying that I'm going to police your desires and stop you from getting married. But all that I'm suggesting is that once marriage comes in queer community, what happens is we have the emergence of the respectable queer vis-a-vis the non-respectable queer. Marriage assures us, whether we like to believe this or not, it gives us certain forms of respectability and acceptability. We are respectable, married, elite queers. And then there are other forms of queers like the lone solitary sex worker or say the single queer parent. And we have seen this with heterosexuals, right? So much of trouble, so much of battles. People,
especially for women.
I still remember a single parent had to fight so that they can put their name as the guardian of the child. And
I see what you're saying. Let me get Raghav, and then I'll come to Nicola and Raga to maybe talk about a more lived experience in navigating this space. Raghav, you mentioned in the beginning that you're actually not married, that you have a child with your partner. That child is not a product of a marriage. You have personally made those choices and you've lived them happily. Why would you want other people, to, instead of seeking freedom from those shackles, sort of stratify and institutionalize those shackles for another entire community that may have actually been free from them?
I think the most pressing reason why this is needed is so that people I'm not comparing my struggle to the struggles of somebody from the LGBT community, so that people from the LGBT community, let's say, who have partners in India, can actually meet each other. So yes, I agree with some of what Rahul says, but there are many practical and legal considerations that we have to think of. And at its heart, I think marriage is a legal institution. So you can say that, okay, I want to live outside the pale of the legal system. That's a choice that you make, but that's not always practical for everybody. And especially in a country like, and it's not just something that is restricted to India. I just mentioned my experience with German border control. And despite the fact that I had the birth certificate and all other documents, and also despite the fact that the German Interior Ministry had allowed people like me to enter Germany, despite COVID restrictions, I had to literally jump through hoops. And it's good that I have the kind of privilege where I can, speak English, or I have money. So that's not such a big deal for me. But there are so many people who are suffering because they are LGBT and they cannot get married. So while what Rahul says is very well received, and there is, of course, a need for this legal sanctification. And personally, although I don't believe in the social trappings of the institution around marriage, but if it makes it easy for me and my partner to travel to Germany and to India respectively, then I would probably make the choice to marry in the future too. And so I don't see any reason why somebody from the LGBTQIA community should be denied this right.
Raga, I saw you agreeing with a lot of what Rahul was saying, the premium on the institution, the premium on coupledom, what happens to single people, what happens to people who may assemble a family. I know your former husband doesn't stay with you, but tomorrow he might, right? And you could have a family of 3 people. There are other family structures. They're not legally recognized in India, but there are states in the United States of America where there are 3 people in a family, and that is recognized, right? So basically, I think the argument that I'm making is that the modern age has really put an entire question mark on the notion of the conventional family structure, on the notion of conventional love, on the notion of what is conventionally acceptable. And mostly free societies would say what is acceptable between consenting adults should be acceptable. So are we regressing here? Are we regressing here with the enormous premium? What will happen next will be some sort of Sima auntie for the LGBTQ community. You're going to see some Indian matchmaking, institutionalized rubbish, the kind of, conventionality for the LGBTQ community. Right? So,
But Barkha, we are talking from a place of privilege, and you have to always remember that. And I remind myself of that a lot because, I have citizenship of 2 countries. I can walk in and out of India when I want. So, but, are we regressing? I personally, if I have to question that, I would say I would love to live the life that I've lived, which is freely. I absolutely have lived my life on my terms. I live a free life, but are others allowed that freedom? So when we talk about the marriage rights, it is basically providing or allowing people access to equality, inclusion, that kind of freedom, which I have. If I choose to be married, I would be married. If I didn't want to, I wouldn't want to be married. I'll give you an example, Barkha. I lived in New Zealand. When I met Nicola, my children were very little. Now they're nearly 23 years old. So we have twins. And in New Zealand, automatically Nicola becomes the official guardian for the children. So we live this happy life, 2 moms bringing up the kids, ex-husband happily accepting the fact. Then we go to India. We spent the last 8 to 9 years in India, as you know, on our business, back and forth. And we also had children with us in the initial 2 years. But in India, it is not recognized that 2 women can bring up the children. So in India, when we went for simple things like school admissions, all we could do is put Nicola in as a guardian or an emergency contact. There was no status given to her because we are not officially or legally married. Now that is quite a if you look at it from a couple's point of view, It's a similar relationship to what I had with my ex-husband. There is love, there is commitment, there is everything else that you would have in a heterosexual relationship, but basic rights are not given. So, which means if I want that for me for now, is it regressive?
Yeah. Nicola, if you want to add to that, and then I'll get Rahul to respond. I get your point, but really the argument I'm hearing is one of pragmatism and legality. And maybe the fight, therefore, has to be against the premium that is placed on this. In the same way, Raghav, that you would know, for example, that there is now a recognition of a common law wife, right? Because earlier it was suggested that, there have been women who've lived with men for years and years, like in the institution of a marriage, but there was no legal rights for them. So is the fight misdirected? Should the fight actually be about, not needing marriage as a vehicle for these legal rights, instead of saying, give us marriage so we can have these legal rights? Nicola?
Yeah, to a point I agree. I believe that anti-discrimination should be there, and so there should not be discrimination if you're in a de facto common law partnership. But I think our community talks about love, a lot about love. Love is love, we're free to love, and so forth. So I think marriage becomes a commitment to that love. And I think as a community, I think the more of us that will get married, I think that marriage will change from the traditional patriarchal thing. I think it will evolve and change to a celebration of love. And I really believe that as time goes on, that will change. And I understand. I went through that whole thing in my head too over many years. Like, do I really want to get married? Do I really want to do this? Do I really want to do that? But it does come down to my choice, and I don't have to adhere by those strict patriarchal rules. I think we can change. I think that will change. Whether you're heterosexual or gay, I think that will change. And it is. It's literally a celebration of love. I've been to pride parades in different countries. It's not about patriarch, it's about celebration of love, and that's what marriage should be.
Okay, fair enough. Rahul, are you convinced?
Okay, I am, yes, but all that I'm trying to say is that, as I said before, I totally understand the concerns that Raga and Nicola are raising, and which Raghav was raising too. But all that I'm trying to say, despite that, is we cannot lose the critique of marriage as an institution. And just by winning the legal right does not necessarily dissolve the concerns that the queer community or any marginalized communities have been facing. So I think winning the legal right can at the most be a symbolic victory, like we have seen with 377, like we have seen with the Trans Act, which the Supreme Court, the Nalsa verdict, which came in 2013. But I'm not too convinced to say that can lead to social change, because we have so many rights in front of us to lay claim to it. Look at the conversation around.
I'm going to interject briefly, and then you can respond to it, because I can see him disagreeing vociferously with you on something.
Yeah, I'll tell you what, it's very easy to make these points in the abstract about how society needs to change. But the situation here is that if you are an LGBT person in India and you have a partner, let's say America or UK or Germany or wherever, that person cannot come to India at the moment because your relationship is not recognized by the law. So I think we need to, first focus on what is urgently needed. And yes, these social changes can come later. We can have a broader discussion about it. I'm not a student of sociology. I'm a student of the law. But as of now, without any legal recognition for these relationships, LGBT couples are facing huge problems. I don't represent any LGBT people, but a lot of them have written to me saying that this hashtag love is not tourism, which is very popular in the EU and which has led the European Union to change the rules for unmarried couples, is something that is applicable in the Indian context also. And people really are facing a lot of pain because of it. We cannot, have this discussion without talking about the real practical difficulties and inconveniences that people are facing throughout the world.
Okay. Rahul?
I think Raghav made my point a little easier, because this is the final point I actually wanted to arrive at, that what marriage does, that it is also at the end of the day a highly individualized project. It's the end of the day brings back the notion of the I. It brings back the notion of the personal. And I'm not saying any of these are not important. certainly they are important, but exactly to quote what Raghav was saying, that my problems should get solved first. I don't care about other problems. And
No, I don't
probably
think
that
that's
is
what
not
he's
what
saying. I think what he's saying is that for you to say that 377, striking down 377 was only symbolic, it was only the beginning of the fight, not the end of the fight, is a point well taken. But where would we be without that token? And the tokens matter, small changes matter. And guess what? This we are calling the striking down of 377 a small change today. I remember 15, 18, 20 years ago when this fight first began, we didn't think an India could exist where this would be struck down, which already shows you how much society has changed. So I don't think we can undervalue how important it is for the laws to keep pace. Rahul.
I know I completely agree with you, Barkha. The only thing I think is that you are absolutely right. Society has changed. And I think that change has happened due to galvanization of movements that we have seen around us. If you remember when 377 was reinstated in 2013, I remember all the TV channels, including, even you, have had shows on television which were extremely affirmative about queer issues, about LGBTQ people. And this is what I feel is that, now, even when the law is there and the law is not there, I think changes around us happen through initiation of conversations and movements, which is not to say that the striking down of the law is
But
not
suppose this law was still, suppose you were still a criminal in this country, right? We'd be having a totally different conversation right now. We've even got to the point where we are able to talk about whether marriage is worth pursuing for the LGBTQ community. I'm telling you, forget the shows I did on television. I was one of the earliest signatories, I remember about 2 decades ago, to saying take down this law. It has taken 20 years for this law to go. It might take another 20 years for this for same-sex marriages to be recognized in India. I'm not a great fan of marriage, but I'm a great fan of the law changing. If you see the difference, I don't think it's a small thing. I don't think it's a small thing for laws to change. I agree that change takes time to filter down, but I don't think conversations alone drive change. I think even for the uncles and aunties in our building societies and our WhatsApp groups, the difference between legality and non-legality, Rahul, has a lot to do with change.
Absolutely.
If I can respond briefly, Barkha, you see, my example to that will be the rape laws in India. And if you remember, after what we call as the Delhi rape case, the Nirbhaya case, we have had so much conversations around laws. We have had the Verma Committee report coming in. We have had so much laws in place. But that didn't change significantly the condition of women and violence against women in this country, which is not to say that those laws were not important, but which is to say that laws will operate.
Are not enough. Yes, the laws are not enough. Yes, we all agree with that. But I think it's also our privilege that today looks at 377 as a small change. I think the oldest person on this panel, I remember a time when it felt like a cataclysmic change. But Raga, you wanted to come in and then Raghav. We have to start taking last comments now. Raga, go ahead. Raga, 1 second. Raga, go ahead.
Oh, Raga. No, I totally agree with you, Barkha. I think laws are very important. Laws are the ones that we follow. I mean, we are human. We follow laws, whether we like it or wrong, like it or not, right? Laws are important. What is also important is the whole discrimination that happens because there are no laws. And those are little things that we have to remember. I mean, when you're in the community and you face these things on a daily basis, sometimes people behave unconsciously. These are unconscious biases that have happened over time because there are no laws against it. So if we make it mainstream, if we make it normal, it's just like if Nicola and I want to be married tomorrow, we want to be in a relationship and de facto, that's our choice. So these are basic human rights. I think that is not available. There are steps to everything. So if I have to look at step 1, step 2, step 3, and step 1 being let me have the right to marry, and step 4 being I think it's very regressive. We should not be talking about marriage. But we have to start at step 1. Let's talk about step 4.
I mean, you have to basically have the right to it before you reject it. Is is the point that you're making. And I think that's a fair point. I do have to close. Raghav, here's my point. What is your hope that you can get this petition through? Because the point is that when decriminalization took place, and please correct me on this if I'm wrong, I do believe the issue of same-sex marriage has been raised and not addressed by the courts. It's not something the courts have responded positively to. What makes you think this time around is different? You're making a very technical argument by quoting the Hindu Marriage Act and saying it only talks about two Hindus, but that's not how the courts are necessarily going to process it.
I don't think it's a very technical point, because at the end of the day, it's interpretation of statutes 101, that if there are two interpretations available, then you take the interpretation which would render the statute constitutional. This point of the validity of same-sex marriage had not been raised earlier before the court. So I think in this respect, these bunch of petitions are quite unique. And since there has been, this after the 2018 judgment in Navtej Johar, there is a lot of awareness that has spread around homosexuality and how homosexuality is not something that is a choice that people make. I would like to believe that the courts would be receptive, and there are so many precedents from around the world. I was reading Obergefell versus Hodges the other day, and so many observations that the US Supreme Court made there are quite relevant to the Indian context. And it's not just the US Supreme Court. There are many courts from across the world, from common law jurisdictions, where courts have upheld the validity. One last point in response to Mr. Sen. All of his points are great. And I, for one, would be really happy if we were all, Rousseau's noble savages who could just go about our business without any legal sanction or whatever. But unfortunately, it's not the case. We need law in this society, and therefore legal recognition is really important for people to be able to live their lives. And there are many practical
I think Rahul is making the point that the law is not enough, and I think we all agree with that. The law is one element of change, but actually, to me, to end on a note of hope, there's some sense of how far India has traveled, that today we're able to call changing the law a small step. That we're able to call striking down 377 a small step, that we're able to call the recognition of the trans community as a third gender a small step, because I am old enough to remember a country where it seemed almost impossible to achieve any of this, where some of you would have been criminals under the law today, and I can't stress enough how far we've come from that moment. So I think that is the note of hope to end this conversation on. We'll watch very carefully what happens to Raghav's petition in the court. Nicola, Raghav, and Rahul, thank you so much, and we'll keep a close eye on this story. Thank you, and take care.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye, guys.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.